Welcome to the Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services podcast. I'm Gail Lucas, your host. I'm also the Division Chief for the Customer Support and Outreach Division here at DPS. Joining me on the podcast today is Water Resources Manager. I want to make sure I get that right. Water Resources Manager, Mark Etheridge.
Correct.
How are you, Mark?
Doing all right. Thanks for asking me over here.
Why don't we start with you telling folks what your job here is at DPS?
My staff reviews construction plans for compliance with environmental regulations.
Okay.
We have a delegation of authority to do that review from the Maryland Department of the Environment, and then we also enforce county level criteria as well.
Is it all about water or is it other things?
We do sediment control, stormwater management, and floodplain compliance. So it's really all about water and all about water pollution and volume of water and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Today's hot topic is about water runoff. I hate water emergencies. Water goes everywhere, and I hate them in my house. But can you talk to us about the difference between water runoff and flooding? Or is there a difference between water runoff and flooding?
Yeah, flooding is water where you don't want it, and flooding is a result of runoff. Runoff and flooding are just connected. They're the same thing. Flooding really implies that it's impeding someone's ability to use a piece of property for some reason.
Okay.
Maybe the intersection is flooded.
Okay.
Maybe your backyard is flooded and you can't get to your swing set or whatever it is. But it all results from runoff.
Okay. And does DPS treat them interchangeably, or do we do anything different for a flooding situation versus a runoff situation, and the terms are interchangeable?
The only difference in water resources is that we would look at runoff velocities to make sure they're not erosive.
Okay.
That causes an environmental deficit.
Okay.
Otherwise, runoff creates flooding. They are just interchangeable.
Okay. And what is DPS's role in controlling that, or do we have a role in controlling that or addressing that? I shouldn't even say controlling it. Water goes where it wants to go.
Sure. I've read that the law of gravity cannot be broken.
Okay.
And that's probably true. Water does flow from property to property, and it will continue to do that, and it will always do that. A lot of that complaint issue that we get from water flowing from one property to the other and potentially causing damage really comes down to civil issues with civil court issues and things like that. We don't have a lot of regulations that we can really enforce for that. What we do in DPS Water Resources primarily is look at environmental mitigation.
Okay.
So when you do work on a piece of property and you change the way water works on that property, we want to protect and reduce the amount of degradation of the environment to the receiving stream system. So we look at controls to reduce some of that runoff, to remove pollutants from some of that runoff, and to get water back into the ground for groundwater recharge so the streams maintain their health. Our real purpose is to protect the receiving stream system. When you talk about lot-to-lot runoff and what we call nuisance drainage, that really is a problem for the courts to decide sometimes when there's a problem with property damage, maybe a claim of damages. Someone has to determine whether or not that claim is valid. If there's monetary value there, somebody has to assess that. That's well beyond what we can do here at DPS.
We often get that complaint when there is new construction or someone is building a new addition.
Absolutely.
How does that affect how water leaves your property, or what happens with water runoff? Talk to us about how buildings.
Yeah. Like I said, water starts to run off when it can't get into the ground.
Okay.
So water gets into the ground much better on dirt than it does concrete.
Right.
So when you pave an area, that is going to increase the amount of runoff in a given storm event.
Okay.
We mitigate some of that. We work with a statistical one-year storm event for stormwater environmental compliance. But we look at conveyance issues when we have a plan in front of us as well.
Okay.
Ultimately, designing a project that doesn't cause damage to adjacent properties due to flow is the responsibility of the engineer and the applicant under state law. But we do keep that into consideration. We have a runoff statement that we have the engineers sign saying they understand that they are responsible for their design as it is related to runoff onto other properties. If we see that there's a concern in our mind that there may be a problem with conveyance through adjacent properties, we have the engineers submit a study to us to show that they've done their due diligence. We push it as much as we can. Ultimately, it's their responsibility. But we have that information on file in case it is necessary. If someone has to go to court, we can certainly produce that.
We do drainage reviews on building permits.
Yes.
And what are you looking for when you're doing the drainage review?
The drainage code was enacted in 2007.
Okay.
I think March 1st, 2007. Okay. And that's part of the building permit code in Montgomery County, Chapter 8. It's not part of the stormwater management code, and it's not stormwater management.
Okay.
What the drainage code says is that if you have not addressed stormwater management for a new house on a residential lot that's 15,000 square feet in size or smaller, then you must look at drainage code if you have over 400 square feet of additional lot coverage.
Okay.
That's part of your building.
Okay.
So when that comes into play, we haven't done stormwater management. It's an addition. It doesn't require sediment control, let's say.
Right.
So they're increasing by 400 square feet.
Right.
That drainage code comes into play. The drainage code says they have to redirect that flow away from adjacent properties or provide some sort of treatment for it in a 1.5-inch rainfall over 24 hours.
Okay.
So they'll put a dry well in or something like that. They have to if the soils are okay for that. They may do a rain garden. Most of the times they'll try to redirect that flow so that it doesn't affect the adjacent properties.
So it's all about how you landscape, how you plan your patio or your addition so that the water moves away.
Yeah, we have to look to see
way.
where the water is going to go, and we can use our topography maps to do that. The topo maps will show us where that water is going to go.
Okay.
And so that's the area that we have to place our attention on. So during the building permit review, if there's a drainage plan required, my staff and the right-of-way staff typically do those reviews.
Okay.
Sometimes there are right-of-way permits that have to be obtained if you're directing flow into the public right-of-way.
Okay.
So the right-of-way staff knows how to do that. My staff has a little more experience with the flow of water and doing dry wells and things like that. So we also look at those plans and make sure they comply with the drainage code. But it's ultimately a part of the building permit set.
Okay.
It comes in with the building permit submission.
You use a term that we hear a lot, and I don't know if everybody really knows what it means. What is a dry well?
Dry well is an underground box of rocks.
Okay.
All right. You dig a hole, you put rocks in it.
Okay.
The rocks don't fit tightly together, so there's a void space between the rocks, which gives you an area to store water. So we direct the downspouts into this area of stone below the surface.
Right.
We store that amount of water, and the only place it can go is down.
Okay.
Into the soil.
Okay.
So it doesn't run off. It removes pollutants and it recharges the groundwater. So
it's a good solution. It can be a good solution for conveying water.
It certainly can. They have limited drainage
into
areas.
Your neighbor's basement.
Well, it can help with that. Primarily, we use it for environmental purposes, but it can certainly do that. It can take a small drainage area in a small storm event. This 1.5-inch rainfall event is probably appropriate for that.
Okay.
But they're limited to 1,000 square feet of surface area, and it's got to be roof area. So,
and if I believe that water is running off from my neighbor's construction site or from their regrading or their retaining wall that they've put in, what, if anything, can DPS help me with?
If we have an open permit that we're overseeing in the field, they can contact us and let us know they have a concern. Sometimes we don't have a permit out there. We need to know about that work.
Right.
Sometimes the permit is not being administered correctly in the field.
Okay.
Sometimes there's a problem with the permit.
Okay.
Our inspectors can work with the contractors and the applicants to let them know there is a concern and a potential problem. And a lot of times during that time in the field, we can rework that plan to alleviate that problem.
Okay. But ultimately, this could be a civil matter. Ultimately, it's something that you may have to work out with your neighbor in mediation or even go to court for.
It can happen, yeah. The vast majority of cases that we see with people, for example, tearing down a house on an existing lot and building a new one, don't cause any problems. But there will be problems, and they have occurred. And ultimately, that may have to go to civil court.
What are the two biggest takeaways that our listeners and our viewers, since we're on now video, that our viewers can take away from this discussion? What are the two things they need to think about? If they're planning on doing some kind of construction, maybe they're planning on putting in a patio.
Sure.
What do they need to remember?
A lot of people don't understand where the water is going to go. Think about where the water is going now, and what you're going to do might affect that water flow.
Right.
We've had people that put up a little retaining wall in the backyard that The water hits and goes around it and gets rediverted to someplace on the neighbor's yard, causes a problem.
Okay.
We've had people put in all kinds of things that cause problems for the neighbors, redirecting a downspout, putting a flex pipe on there and directing it somewhere else. Might take it to a point where it outfalls onto the neighbor's property and maybe goes into their garage where it didn't do that before.
Okay.
Grading the backyard or putting on a small addition on your house, changing that landform. Just be aware of where the water looks like it's going to go. And you can look at it in most cases and see where that slope is and get an idea of how that water is going to flow.
And as the property owner, how would I know that? Do I need to bring in a professional to give me that guidance, or can I see where the water is going to go?
In a lot of cases, you can see it. A lot of the older neighborhoods were designed with a low area in the backyards for flow conveyance.
Okay.
And you'll see that backyard is lower than the front yard in a lot of cases. Some cases it might not be so obvious. And if you're going to do a significant landscaping project, you might want to have somebody take a look at it and maybe take some elevations.
Thank you, Mark, for joining us on the podcast today. This has been some very useful information. Are there resources? Do we have resources that folks can access that help them understand runoff and how they can mitigate runoff on their property?
There certainly are. If you go to the website, our website, and do a search for drainage, you'll see a number of choices that you can choose for different amounts of information about runoff. DOT, Department of Transportation, has a drainage assistance program that deals with runoff from the public right-of-way or from a county-owned and maintained piece of property. So if you're having issues with flooding coming off the road into your property, that drainage assistance program would be a good place for you to go to. Housing has a good website as well to talk about lot-to-lot runoff. There's some things they can get involved with to help homeowners cope with runoff from their neighbors' property. Department of Environmental Protection has their Rainscapes program, and there is information if you search for drainage on that Rainscapes program as well that actually go to sites and help people design treatments in their lawns and things to deal with runoff, and they can help in some cases to provide guidance and sometimes actual help. But there's a lot of resources on the website for that if you just search for drainage.
Water everywhere. I'm sorry. It was right there. I had to say it.
I know it.
Thank you again, Mark. Remember, DPS is here to help you, our customer, succeed. It's important to know when to get a permit and why you need a permit. If you have any questions about the permitting process, please reach out to DPS. You can contact us by calling 311 or 240-777-0311 and talking with one of our customer service representatives. Or you can stop by our offices at 2425 Reedy Drive. We're on the 7th floor, and we're open Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 4 o'clock p.m. if you need in-person assistance, or if you just have a question or would like to talk over your plans with someone. Thank you again, Mark, for joining us on the podcast to discuss water runoff. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Please check out the Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services website, montgomerycountymd.gov/DPS, to find information and resources to help you with your next project. Do you have an idea or a question or a topic you'd like to see discussed on our podcast? We want to hear from you. Please email us at dps.podcast@montgomerycountymd.gov. And if you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe so that you are always aware of our latest episodes. Encourage your friends and your family or people that you know that are starting a project to tune in to our podcast for useful information. Until next time, I'm Gail Lucas. Remember, DPS is your project partner.
This podcast is brought to you by County Cable Montgomery, your source for news and information from the Montgomery County government. Connect with us via cable, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube by searching for County Cable MoCo.